Hey everybody, it's Mark from Circle of the Dark Mother. Today we're going to do a topic that's quite a long title. Why isn't there more Lilith references in Mesopotamian literature? And the reason we're going to talk about this is I know some people debate Lilith being a goddess for various reasons. We've proven she is, but I'll go over that again in case this is your first video. And then also talk about why there aren't that many references to her. There are a few, but not as many as I know people would hope. So let's talk about it. So first of all, a little bit of history, Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia is an area of the ancient world that borders the Persian Gulf and is currently, or would be currently, where Iraq and Syria are located. Mesopotamia had an unbroken chain of occupation since about 10,000 BCE, maybe longer. Several cultures inhabited the region until the Sumerian culture came in and took over the area. The Sumerians came in and took over, but we don't know anything about their origin. They called themselves the Black-Headed People, but we don't know if they came from the mountains to the east, whether they came from Anatolia, which is now Turkey, or whether they came from Indus Valley, which is now India. So Sumeria consisted of several city-states, such as Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, Kesh, Nippur, and others. Sumer and Mesopotamia is often considered the cradle of civilization because of the large cities, some of the first cities in the world, and the first place where we found written language, what eventually becomes cuneiform. Later, Sumer was invaded by the Akkadians, who adopted most of the Sumerian culture, including their writing style. They changed the language, but used the same cuneiform writing. Cuneiform is based on syllables, and so they just translated it to their language and kept using the written language. The land of Sumer and Akkad is then invaded by the northern Assyrians, who took over the whole region. And then the last culture in Mesopotamia was a resurgence of the land of Sumer and Akkad under the city of Babylon. Now, Babylon was a city, and they considered their whole area the land of Sumer and Akkad, but some scholars call it Babylonia, because just basically to differentiate it from the earlier Sumer and Akkad. Persia invades this land in around 500 BCE and wiped out the whole Mesopotamian culture. Now, it took some time, but they instituted their religion, their language, and eventually Mesopotamian culture dissolved. Mesopotamian magic. The cultures of Mesopotamia practiced magic as part of their day-to-day culture. Literature and archaeologic evidence shows that they used fire, astrology, crystals and stones, oils, herbs, incense, and many other items that we see in magic in other cultures. Each city had its own set of deities that were thought to be the protectors of the city. In addition, there were hundreds of other gods and goddesses that were worshipped by individuals or used for specific magic practices. Most of what we know about Mesopotamian magic was found in the form of incantations written in cuneiform. There's also some information in the great epics, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Scholars have found that many of the practices we see in what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Tanakh were begun in Mesopotamia and then adopted into Judaism during the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian Empire took over part of the Jewish homeland, and they put into exile their leaders and their religious leaders. And so they were in Babylon, picked up a number of things and took it back with them, such as oils, psalms. The Song of Solomon comes almost directly from a hymn to Ishtar. And then, of course, they also picked up Lilith, who was named Lilitu in Mesopotamia. So magic practitioners, there are three different kinds of magic practitioners in Mesopotamia. In Akkadian, there are several words associated with magic workers. The word for an official priest or priestess of any god or goddess was called kalu. So any of the priests and priestesses for any one of the gods was a kalu priest or priestess. But there were also bisexual, gender-fluid servants of Inanna, later called Ishtar, who were also called Gala. They were kalu, but because they were these servants of Inanna and Ishtar, They were also called Galah. There were also official exorcists who worked in the cities and were called Asapu. They would be called on to cast out demonic entities for healing, prosperity, or any other reason. Unofficial magic users in the population, who would be much like witches in other cultures, were called Kasaptu for female and Kasapu for male. These Kasaptu and Kasapu were civilians who practiced much like a wise woman or cunning man in other cultures. People used them when needed, but they were considered evil by the religious elite. This is typical of many religions that at times demonize those outside of the religious hierarchy. And the Kasaptu and Kasapu were laymen. They were not part of the temple structure. So they built their magic on basically their heritage, things they knew from their family, and things they had gained on their own. So a little bit about Lilith in Mesopotamia. So Lilith is a goddess in ancient Sumeria or Sumer, which contains the Sumerian culture, the Akkadian culture, the Assyrian culture, and then back to Babylon, which is very close to Sumer and Akkadian. And she is associated with wind, night, and sexuality. Lilith is both a god, goddess, and a demon. Gods and goddesses are descended from the primordial pair of deities, so you have to be born into being a god or goddess. And demons are any god or spirit who doesn't follow the rules. And those rules are basically the very ordered contracts that were made with cities, the way that the priests worked with them. So it was a very, very set structure. The god and goddess demons, or spirits that were demons, followed their own rules and worked with individuals instead of hierarchies. The name Lilith appears in the Sumerian Assyrian god list. This is a document that has both the Sumerian and the Assyrian names of every god that they knew of. It was called the An-da-Nu'um An-Anu Sa'ameli. And only entities in this list were gods or goddesses, nothing else. Now, they could be demons as well, but that was an attribute, not a title. Lilith is listed in the Sumerian Assyrian god list, her Sumerian name being Dimi-gi or Dimi-ji, and Assyrian is Lilitu. Her name in Sumerian loosely means deity of the night. There are several deities that appear later, post-Sumer, so in Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, who can be associated with Lilith and her attributes. She is eventually brought into Jewish tradition as Lilith, and that's during the Babylonian exile. So the question I posed at the beginning, the question that many scholars and individuals have, is why there's only seemingly random references to Lilith if she's a goddess in Mesopotamia. We know that she had to be a goddess since she is in the Sumerian Assyrian god list. But there are over 3,000 gods and goddesses in Mesopotamia in that list. And nowhere near those 300 are listed in cuneiform tablets, or 3,000 are listed in those cuneiform tablets. The major deities worshipped in the region were An, also known as Anu, Enlil, Enki, Marduk, Ashur, Nabu, Nana, also Sin, Utu, Shamash, and Nana, later called Ishtar, Ninhursag, Ninurta, Nergal, Tammuz, Ereshkigal, and Ninlil. These 16 deities were either the deity worshipped by a specific city, their consort, or a god-goddess over a major area, such as Ereshkigal being the goddess of the underworld. As a consort, Tammuz really wasn't a big name, but he's the consort of Inanna, later called Ishtar. So that's why he's spoken about in their literature. Deities of the cities. So to the answer to the question why Lilith is not mentioned in detail in Mesopotamian literature is because she wasn't worshipped as a deity of a city. After the creation of writing via cuneiform script, most people were still illiterate. Only the priests, scribes, and some of the merchants could read and write. So the spiritual writings we see from Mesopotamia were controlled by the Kalu hierarchy of priests. Each city had a central ziggurat temple with the idol of the deity that was worshipped in the city, sometimes their consort as well. All worship and writing was focused on that god or goddess, resulting in only a small number of deities as the focus of their mythology. The Asapu exorcists were trained in the temples and focused their incantations on using either the major deities or a few other deities that they worked with to cast out demon deities or spirits that were believed to be causing chaos for the people. Now, very often in the writings, the Asapu and the Kalu attributed the witch-type figures as the ones who cursed people. And sometimes I'm sure that was possible, but it wasn't all the time. If somebody had something going on that the Asipu decided they needed to exorcise, they always said that it was one of the Kasapu or Kasaptu who had put a curse on somebody. So that demonized these witch-type figures even more. So what about Lilith? The Kasaptu and Kasapu were common people who would have been illiterate, so they left no writings behind to give us insight into their practice. However, we do have incantations and writing by the priests and exorcists that demonize the Kasaptu and Kasapu, saying that they called on gods and goddesses who were also called demons. They were said to bless and curse people. The exorcists often said that these witches were to blame for all kinds of chaos, whether it was true or not. It seems that the Kasaptu and Kasapu worked with the deities that were also called demon because they weren't expected to follow what was dictated by the major gods and goddesses or the city or the Kalu priests or the exorcists. This means that Lilith is most likely a goddess that the Kasaptu and Kasapu may have worked with, among many others. She is considered both a goddess and a demon who controls storms, night, and sexuality. This model is very similar to what we see in many cultures, a religious elite that supports the rich and powerful, with magic practice of the common people being more of a folk practice, with deities that they felt were more sympathetic to them. And of course, these religious hierarchies always demonize and marginalize these common people and their practices. So that's the end of it. That explains a little bit of why we don't see Lilith in her guise' Lilith in as much literature as we would like. She is mentioned a couple times. Epic of Gilgamesh, a couple of the hymns to Ishtar, and a few other random places. But she's not mentioned that much because she's not a city deity. And being a demon goddess, that means she followed her own rules and was probably used by the Kasapu and Kasaptu, but not the religious elite. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you. Take care.